Welcome to the Outlier Mindset Podcast, your guide for living a life by design. Here, we explore the journey of becoming an outlier, finding your purpose, mastering your mindset, optimizing your health, achieving financial freedom, and building a life centered around your passions. So tune in, transform, and thrive. Welcome to the Outlier Mindset. Let the journey begin. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Outlier Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Rodman, and today I'm very pleased to welcome Laurie Barkman, also known as the Business Transition Sherpa. Laurie is a former CEO of a $100 million revenue company that was acquired by a Fortune 50 firm. Now she guides business owners through transition planning and facilitates mergers and acquisitions in the lower middle market. Laurie is also the author of the Business Transition Handbook and the creator of the Endgame Entrepreneurship Masterclass, which in my opinion, when you put them together, is just like earning an MBA because you're going to get so much valuable information. Laurie, welcome to the show.
Rodman, thank you. I'm so excited to be with you today.
Yeah, it's going to be great to have you on. I know we're going to talk about a lot of neat things, stuff that's really important to me, things that I've been through that I enjoy talking about. And that's the exit strategy. And how do you prepare? A lot of business owners don't prepare for the end. They prepare to begin. They prepare while they're going through the process, but they're not thinking about the exit and when do I leave and how do I leave and how do I get all that value out when I do leave? So I'm looking forward to today a lot.
Oh, thanks. There's so much to talk about. I don't know. Where do you want to start? My goodness.
Yeah, let's start at the beginning. So an entrepreneur is going into business. And the first thing that we're doing is we're designing business plans. We're looking at, okay, we're doing our planning. How are we going to start? How are we going to execute? Who are we going to hire? What kind of service are we going to bring in? But when you're doing that, why is it so important that you start to think about the exit even before you start?
I love this question. Why is it also that in MBA curriculums where they're teaching startups how to launch, that they'll encourage them to have an exit plan, right? And if those startups want to go in front of venture capitalists, those VCs are going to ask them what their exit plan is. Why is that question only reserved for venture-backed startups? It sort of begs the question that, hey, the everyday entrepreneur should begin with the exit in mind. And that's essentially a big mantra that I have. And I know we're going to talk a lot about it today, is build with the exit in mind. And it is important for a number of reasons that you said. One, can we have some control over the process? Can we have some intention for what we want to do? Now, we recognize that buyers buy on their time, not yours. However, if your company is well run and well positioned for an exit, the timing can be influenced by you, and your exit can be influenced by you so that you can exit on your terms and your timeline.
Yeah, and I've been through a few exit strategies myself in terms of getting acquired, and they're very different. It's kind of like being a small business owner. You don't really know what to expect when you're going through that process. You don't understand the dynamics until you actually do it. And the last one that I did, we had a lot of things that I didn't know. I didn't know things like earnouts. I didn't understand. You get a little bit of idea on why they want you to have a non-compete and some of those other things when you're leaving the other company. But there are things that you don't think about till the end of the journey. But who should be thinking about it initially? Who should be those people is it when you start a business for anybody, or are you small businesses going, nah, I don't need to? Is there a threshold in there?
Well, 100% of business owners are going to leave their company one day, but very, very few are prepared. And people are either going to leave horizontally or vertically. So let's just let that sink in for a second. And if we have an intention to leave as we're standing, then I would say, look, any business owner should be thinking about one day, how do they let go on their terms? And there's good reason to be planning for that. There's the gain and there's the pain, right? The gain side is, how do we build value? How do we maximize the value of our business so that when we are ready to let go, we've found best fit buyers and we're punching above our weight class when it comes to the valuation. The pain side is when there's all kinds of things that can get in the way of us getting the value that we think our business is worth, and so on. So the question, I believe, and the answer, I think, is really geared for any entrepreneur who sees their business as an asset and not just a job. How do you see your business as an asset and not a job? What are some of the characteristics? Well, if your business is a job, you happily get a paycheck. You're punching the clock 9 to 5, so to speak. Your business is probably a little bit on somewhat of an autopilot, we can say it that way. You might be coasting and sort of happy with status quo. When your business is an asset, you're focused on the number one metric, which is enterprise value. Now, many entrepreneurs don't know what enterprise value is. So I'm here to say that is your number one metric, and it is very important for you to know, which is what is the value of your business? There's a great saying, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. And I want to come up with a corollary about, about enterprise value, because what that saying points to is, yeah, we can talk about the top line all day long, but if we're not driving profit, then, what do we have to show in terms of financial opportunity? Some companies are all about revenue only. They're SaaS businesses and high growth, and they'll get a multiple of revenue, and we all scratch our heads and go, oh my goodness. But most of the companies that, again, I'll call kind of the everyday entrepreneur companies, the ones that are making our economy work so effectively and employing such a large percent of population in the United States. These are the family-led businesses, founder-led businesses, entrepreneur-led businesses that can have a successful exit with an intention to have a transition. I use the word transition a lot because it's a movement. It's a point from here to there. The word exit is a sub of that, right? Or succession is a sub of that. Succession of what? Succession of ownership, succession of leadership. And so whether or not your business is attractive, transferable, and has a balanced amount of risk and value, that's in the eye of the buyer. So we can think all we want all day long about how valuable our business is. But at the end of the day, because this is a private market, it's up to the buyers in terms of what value they will get. As Warren Buffett said, price is what you pay, value is what you get.
Yeah, and I can imagine that it's a lot on how you package yourself too. And I mean, we've always looked at EBITDA, of course, and looked at a multiple of EBITDA, a lot of the deals that I've worked on. And you can correlate some sort of a multiple on the gross number also. And that way, if you see that the EBITDA number that you're going a multiple on, if it's way off from what that gross number would be, there's probably an issue in the cash flow somewhere. Maybe you're overpaying staff, or maybe you've got some sort of expense line that you need to go in and take a look at. But a lot of these things are very interesting that people don't really even think about it in that journey. They're not when they're going through the process or when they're building that business, they're not looking at how they can maximize their cash flows, get themselves in line with what's happening in the marketplace too. Because there's so many companies that might have, you might have a company that's got a standard 45% labor line in a certain area. And if you're operating at 55% or 60%, when you go to sell, that's going to impact you. That's going to have an impact on what you can sell for and what you can get in return.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of business owners might be putting some personal expenses through the business. And then when it comes time for the financial analysis, we're looking at the performance of the business, but there might be costs buried in and they forget, or we don't have visibility to what some of those personal expenses are. So we should probably talk a little bit about adjustments. And when you're looking at EBITDA, it should be adjusted EBITDA or adjusted net income. And the acronym for that, or the description of that, is seller discretionary earnings, or SDE. And the difference between SDE and adjusted EBITDA is if you are selling your business and someone needs to replace you, if you're an operator in the business today, because you're no longer going to work there. If we are not replacing you, we would use something up higher on that income statement, which would be seller discretionary earnings. If we're replacing you with a general manager or a president or some other role, we have to add that back in. And then that's how we get to an adjusted EBITDA number. Other things that we could look at in terms of take in or put back, if you have really big revenue one year and that is really not going to replicate, in all fairness, you should take that revenue out. Also, if you have a one-time business expense that is not anticipated to be replicated in the next short term, like if you put a new roof on or something, there's arguments to be made about why some business expenses should be add back. So there's some nuances there that As someone like myself who does mergers and acquisitions, we get into the valuations. I do market-based valuations. And so this exercise to kind of clean up the income statement and understand what the add backs are and be very specific about those so that we can showcase them to the potential buyers in the SIM or the confidential information memorandum is an important exercise, because it's also a way to get a more true picture. If another buyer has the business, they'll make different decisions than you. So for example, some non-cash things, we want to make sure those are taken out, interest expense and depreciation, amortization, things like that. Charitable donations are another example, but mostly a lot of times it's expenses that are tied to the owner. So owner compensation, owner healthcare, insurance, the 401k benefits. Sometimes there's cars, sometimes there's golf club, golf memberships and things like that. Sometimes there's CEO membership organizations like YPO or Vistage, right? Those would be expenses that we could take out of the model. So having a really good lens on that is a great place to start. If you're working with an outside advisor, which of course I would recommend that you get some professional support to help you understand, well, what's step one? Step one is let's get your finances organized for the last 3 years and forecast for this fiscal or calendar year, and then do an add back exercise.
Yeah, when you're also emphasizing the importance of just understanding your cash flows. So many people get into business and then they lose track of that. They got somebody else doing it. They got somebody else handling the numbers, and then maybe they're not looking at it like they should be. But once you start losing track of what you're doing, you just kind of lose track of, you can go so off of course really, really quickly. So I always tell people, you got to understand your numbers. I know you're not an accountant. I know you're not a CPA, but you need to understand your cash flows, because if you don't, these things that you're talking about, you're not going to have that understanding. Especially when you come to the sell, you're going to liquidate your company. You're not going to understand why and what should be in and what should be out, what's essential, what's not essential, what was a one-time cost, because there's all those costs in there. They're all loaded in. And you're right. So many people run things through their cash flows. They run personal expenses like that golf club membership you were talking about, or maybe those hockey tickets as a marketing expense, those kind of things. So what would you say, though, is the number one mistake that people make when they're losing track of where they should be headed with their cash flows?
Pertaining to cash flow, I think one mistake is not taking a fresh look at your policies and your invoicing process. There can be some real serious low-hanging fruit and an important low-hanging fruit to go after. For example, I had a client that I just simply asked him the question, what's your invoicing policy? And he was like, well, it's kind of loose. And I said, okay, well, from when you start doing work, when do you think you receive payment? And he said, maybe 60 days. So you start delivering work and you're not paid for 60 days. Yep. Okay, what can we do to address that? Yeah. So they took a fresh look. They had some that they grandfathered in, but eventually they did transition them so that it was more upfront payments and things. They weren't behind the 8 ball when it came to delivering services and then invoicing, right? It's just backwards, because for a small firm like that, it was really important. So just pulling those dollars in, and at the same time taking a fresh look at, well, what are your payment policies? And I'm not an advocate for making small businesses stretch. I'm talking about just in general, you might be able to get better terms just by asking. When I was a CEO running a $100 million business, one of my largest clients extended us terms that were 90-day terms. And we were talking about millions of dollars of impact. It was so significant. And, the way to think about better terms, payment terms from your vendors or your partners is that it's almost like vendor financing, right? Mm. And so there's some tools and mechanics of doing these in and out of your cash flow. If you just take a fresh look at it and say, I wonder if we just ask what would happen, that you might get the answer you are looking for.
Yeah. That's interesting. What do you think too, Laura? I'm just curious about this, thinking as you're talking, do most people overvalue their business or undervalue it? I know I've done a lot of acquisitions, and a lot of the companies that I've gone into have a much higher expectation on value than a lower expectation of value. And I don't know if that's standard or not. I'm curious as to what maybe you run across.
Yeah, I see buy side and sell side. I'm on both sides of the table, not in the same deal, of course. But I definitely think there are buyers who perceive the ROI however they perceive it, right? So they know that they're not going to go above a certain price. And the sellers have put all their energy into this business, and they might have talked to friends on the golf course and had an expectation of what it might sell for. I think that's the important role that an intermediary can play, because we're bringing data into it. We're not just having a subjective, type of approach. There can always be an impasse between buyer and seller. It's a big reason, probably the number one reason why only 8 out of 10 companies in the lower middle market that have an intention to sell actually sell. Or flip that around, only 2 out of 10 actually sell. So 8 out of 10 don't. And so that 8 out of 10, of course, the price, a non-agreement on price is going to be a big part of that. Can we always say it's the seller overvaluing? I don't know. I think there are definitely buyers that are, I don't want to call them bottom feeders, but yeah, I mean, they're going in for that low ball offer. They want to see what happens. And even if they're in early, putting in an LOI and it's rejected, they'll say, well, maybe they'll come back to me. It's kind of like when there's a house for sale and you want to be that first offer and you want to lowball and see what happens. But many times the sellers are going to hang back and say, well, we that's not exactly what we're looking for. We're going to hold back. So I'm not really sure, statistically which way that the answer goes to your question. I think it can go both ways for sure. That buyers are kind of, I have the money, but I'm going to hold back on some of it because I probably need to do a second tranche and put some more capital into the business for growth. So they have a reserve and they kind of know their total budget, but they're not looking to spend it right away at cash at close. And then that's one of the reasons why they're probably going to ask for seller financing. They might be securing a conventional loan or an SBA loan. But they also might be asking for the sellers to be the lender. On the seller side, I think, like I said, it's one of the other reasons why I really do encourage, through my podcast and my book and the course that I've developed, for entrepreneurs to work on this while they have time, so that they can understand what are the needs in the market. It's, if a buyer's going to buy you, your company has to solve a problem for them. And if your company doesn't solve a problem for them, or there's not transferable value or some other, kind of big risk that is inhibiting value, and you're not seeing it, well, then that's on the seller, right? That's on the seller. And a big part of what I talk about in the course is recognizing risk tripwires. And there are many of them. That could be an episode just by itself. And there's like a core 3, and then it builds from there. And I think just looking in the mirror, is a big thing that can help sellers in this process. If you get 3 offers and they're all well below where you think the business should be, well, then that's kind of the market telling you that your price is probably too high.
It's like selling a house. If you have your house on the market and nobody's buying, or they're giving you these low offers, your house is probably not worth that much.
That's right.
Yeah. What about, so when we were out, when we were doing a lot of our acquisitions, we ran into a couple of things. Number one, we'd get the people who are like, well, this has been a family business for 60 years, so there's additional value there. To which we are like, well, the EBITDA is the EBITDA. It's the family business. It should be reflected in your, where your EBITDA is right now. And we're paying this multiple of whatever it might be. I think we were at a 3 to 5 multiple. I want to talk about some multiples here in a little bit. But the other thing I got a lot of is, for a while, everybody was humming, and it's in the real estate industry. Everybody was crushing. Everybody was doing well, but everybody's saying, well, I'm not going to sell now because I'm doing so well. And I kept saying this would be the perfect time to look at your exit strategy, because there's going to be a winter. And when winter hits, we're not going to be here to buy. So I would be looking at selling there. Do you see that a lot, where people are missing on their selling cues, or maybe missing their really good windows of opportunity because they're bringing in too much income?
This is such an important question, Rodman. I'm so glad you brought it up. It's like a myth I want to bust every time I go on a podcast. I want to talk about selling on the up, as opposed to a lot of times what happens is we miss that window and we sell on the down, and then you're headed into Death Valley. There's a story from a gentleman who was on my show, and if we all can kind of put ourselves back in the mid 90s, when we knew that Y2K was going to be a problem, the service firms that were working on fixing the Y2K problem in enterprise software were killing it. They were doing so amazingly well, and the industry was bolstering up itself. So they all knew they could all win, right? They were all supportive. It was a supportive industry. So Bill talked about missing the window, right? His firm was at the time 10 million in revenue, 3 times of revenue. They had a $30 million valuation, but the timeline got closer and closer and closer to when the buyer said, well, I'm not that interested anymore, right? And the closer we got to the late 90s, it was less interesting. Now, they tried to add on other software and other services and things, but it was too late. I mean, the window basically closed. So what happened? Well, it was a sad story. He talks about it now with a bit of a smile and a chuckle, but it was a sad story, right? Lost the business, lost his wife. He had 4 houses. He had, all these cars. He had all this status gone, just completely gone. And you can imagine what that does to the psychology for someone, right? It just emotionally crushing. So he went through a bout of depression. So we want to avoid going off peak, right? We want to just avoid that. But it's tough because when we are holding that big giant golden egg and that golden goose is right next to us and we're petting it going, yay, good job. Give us more golden eggs. It's tough to let that goose go. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly the problem. And the opportunity, as you've so well put it, is if we can see that opportunity ahead of us and know that one of the major drivers of value is growth potential and demonstrated growth potential that the buyer can harvest and benefit from. That's what buyers care about. That may solve some of their pain. To know that there's this predictable, what's the future stream of cash flow look like? And if you have something in your business that helps indicate some sort of truth around that and demonstrate the growth potential, isn't that the opportunity? Another example is a software company that was founded because it was helping to solve some of the Sarbanes-Oxley challenges that arose when that new legislation came out. And the enterprise email systems that needed a solution wanted something quickly, right? Because the time was of the essence with these laws. And so this founder had sold 2 clients and each $1 million revenue per year each. So now their revenue is $2 million. And they were targeting the Fortune 500. So they had a choice. They had a fork in the road, right? They could choose, are they going to go after the other 498, or were they going to look to sell to a strategic? They sold to a strategic because, and for, I think the number was like in the 30 millions. It was like 35 million or something. Not too shabby, because the buyer was a strategic buyer, could stitch it in with its existing platforms. They could cross-sell to the other Fortune 500. And they absolutely sold on the up.
Yeah, and so they probably felt great about that. I know that we were kind of a little bit the same way. We had built a $3 million commercial appraisal company, and we had gone through the process, and we had choices too. Like, we were bumping our heads. We had saturated this market. We couldn't really pull any more market share out of Colorado. So we were looking at either A, are we going to grow nationally, start going into other cities, going to other states and such, or are we going to try to become a part of a bigger platform or a bigger organization? And we were approached by a national firm who came in and said, listen, you guys are putting spots on the map. We love that. So you're growing, you know how to grow. You've got a thriving business there. We would really like to come in with our brand and change you over to our brand and then merge you guys in with us and have you help us grow the larger company. They had about maybe 28 locations at that time. And we literally took it from a 28 location to almost 50 locations over 5 years. But in that period of time, of course, we got our buyout, but we rolled in, we've got a bunch of incentive units. And then we also, I rolled cash back in to that company. So I became an owner. And they had private equity. So then that private equity firm a year later sold, had another buyout, rolled more back in. Then another private equity company came in, bought. And so it's been a transition where right now we're on about our third rotation from that initial buyout, but it was a no-brainer. I mean, if I would have stayed in and if I would have kept doing what I was doing day to day, trying to build a national platform, I'd be pulling my hair out. Instead, I've got a big platform doing so much of that really, really good work and being very successful with it. And I'm reaping the rewards from that.
Yeah. And you developed a niche that was solving a particular pain point for the buyer.
Sometimes we can aimlessly drift through our life, not really sure how to break the patterns and live the life that you've always dreamed of. I get it. I have been there, so caught up in chasing opportunities until I found myself in a life that felt foreign to me. It took me years to unwind the messy web to get back to what I've been put on this planet to do. And let me tell you this, purpose doesn't have to feel out of arm's reach. And I designed a plan for you to do a little bit each day over the next 30 days in a challenge that I call the Outlier 30. It's specifically designed to help you find or create more clarity around your purpose. So if you're feeling lost and you want to finally turn things around and live that life that you were destined to create, sign up right now. It's free. You have absolutely nothing to lose and the whole world to gain.
Visit gorodman.com/outlier30 today.
Let's talk a little bit about multiples. What are the characteristics? And I know quite a few of them, but I probably know a little piece of what you know, but what are the big major multiples or the characteristics that affect multiples?
There are some core characteristics that affect the multiple. The first one has to do with financial performance, but there's other sub-bullets underneath that. But let's spend some time on this one because I think a lot of it resides here. So first and foremost, it's your absolute numbers of the business, and size does matter. So let's kind of bust that myth too. So let's talk about it in kind of the lower millions. I'm not sure who's listening, but just to give a perspective, if your business is 5 million in revenue or lower, 10 million in revenue or lower, we're definitely calling this the lower middle market. We start to see an inflection point of multiples for companies around 25 million and up in revenue. So let's unpack the kind of the size matters thing. A big reason why buyers perceive risk in newer companies or smaller companies is because those companies are presumed to have more owner dependency. So the more dependent our business is on us, it's kind of like this weird catch-22. We think we might be the best reason why this company is doing so great. But in reality, what the buyers are looking for is a transferability beyond you. Whether the assets can stand alone and function on their own, or the team can, function without you, and that kind of thing. So a couple of concepts woven into one, but first and foremost is financial performance. So what are your numbers, right? And it's revenue. Yeah, we talked about revenue, but it's really, as you mentioned earlier, some of these profit statistics. So whether it's net income adjusted to seller discretionary earnings, or if it's EBITDA and adjusted EBITDA to give a proxy for cash flow. So those numbers are important. It's also the quality and consistency of your reporting. If you're using QuickBooks or some platform like that, that's awesome. Be consistent with it. If you have a audited financial report, amazing, but not all companies are doing that or can afford that. It takes a lot of time and it's a fair amount of budget. There's something in between that I'll mention that not a lot of companies know about. It's called reviewed financials. So you would have your accounting firm do it when you, as a little pro tip here, ask your accounting firm about it when they're doing your taxes for the business. And if they add it on when they're doing your annual taxes, it might only be an incremental amount. I don't want to give an absolute number, but let's say under $10,000. And it's a third-party review. So these are reviewed financials, not audited financials. So it takes less time. It's, audited statements have a whole certification on it. And you can imagine each of these have their standards from the accounting ethics and so on. But it's one more thing that you can do to show that your financials have been taken a look at. The other thing I would say that affects your multiple that fits under this this bucket of category on financials is the industry that you are in. This ties a lot to the conversation we were having earlier about revenue multiples. And revenue multiples are going to be the highest we've all seen in technology or other firms that have a recurring revenue model, not reoccurring with an O, and we can talk about the difference here, but a recurring revenue model with a very, very high degree. So 100% recurring revenue, and I'd say a minimum threshold of around 40% could be interesting to get a multiple of revenue. It is possible to get a hybrid multiple where you might have a multiple revenue or multiple on profit. That can happen. So that's a really important one. And I think it also just underscores the importance of having a business that's got a more predictable stream of future cash flow will also generate a higher multiple. So that's kind of why the buyers look at it that way. And so the industry, and then the other thing would be your geography. What geography are you in? So all of those things kind of bundle, but there's so many other drivers too, Rodman, that we can talk about.
So it makes sense that a big company would come in and say maybe acquires a smaller company, and they might be able to do so at maybe a 3 to 5 multiple. And then when they go in and they're marketing it as the larger company, maybe to private equity and such, they might be looking at an 8 multiple. So is that kind of the correlation there between size matters?
I don't know. I mean, I was thinking of it more like, size matters. So you go back to your example. I think you're saying, I'm trying to answer your question and I'm trying to get my head around it. You're saying once they've acquired them, that's more like when you've bundled them in to your existing platform, then the multiple gets assumed by the larger entity. Yes, that's true. But think of it more like, let's say you have a restaurant and your restaurant is 5-star and it's Italian and it drives a lot of recurring, or happy customers. Maybe you've, got a nice creativity there. Well, in LA or in some saturated market where there's a lot of restaurants, it's a great restaurant, but there's many of them, right? And the competition's probably pretty fierce. Versus if that restaurant was in a geography that there's like a scarcity, right? And someone else like, I got to have that restaurant. It's such a destination, right? It's so unique. There's something so special about it that same restaurant in a totally different location could drive a different multiple. So it's really hard. It is kind of like the snowflake, right? All these businesses, they seem similar on the outside, but once you get into the detail, there could be reasons why a multiple would be higher or lower. Even in big strokes, it looks like it's the same business.
Yeah, gotcha. So this has been good. So we've talked a little bit about EBITDA, we've talked about cash flows, we've talked about multiples, but let's go back to the beginning. What should people be doing in the beginning when they're setting themselves up for success, when they're starting with the end in mind? What should people be doing?
Just like any business is going to have product market fit or service market fit, I like to talk about buyer market fit. If your company is solving a particular problem for a buyer, isn't that exciting, right? And if you build with that in mind, not that for that one buyer necessarily, but the category, then you're on a path. You're on an exciting path and doors can open.
Yeah. So I've started my business, and I don't know, I'm going to ask you this question because I don't know if it matters or not, because I tell people not to do this all the time, but I could be giving bad advice. I'm known to do that at times. But should people put their family name in their business name?
It's hard to say yes or no to that. I'll just sort of talk about, implications of it. There's about, I guess, 1 out of 5 would have a family name on the door. In terms of transition, we could talk about best fit buyers. So there's going to be a buyer after you who was that best fit. And sometimes it's a related person, or it could be family, it could be, related, could also be kind of insiders like management. For the companies that have an intention and the legacy for the business to continue on, the name might be really, really important to the brand. Hermes, right? I just listened to the Acquired podcast episode on Hermes. Amazing family business story in France. And yeah, that name is really, really important. And You look at a company like Zildjian, right? The oldest company in the United States, Zildjian drums. But when it's time to let go and we consider the transactional stuff, right? You and I just spent all this time talking about transactional stuff, and we need to talk about the other side, which is the personal side and the letting go side. And it can be challenging from an identity, right? To let go, especially when your name is on the door. So if you do have that intention as an entrepreneur to eventually let go, you probably want to think about how will you feel if they don't use that name anymore. There was a gentleman who came on my show, and his family had a bleach business, and they sold the bleach company. And he said he could not walk down the supermarket aisle and look at the products. He just couldn't. It was too upsetting to him. So again, I think it's a very personal consideration. Some people use it as a default because it's sort of easy. Others have made up more of a brand out of it. Like there's a advertising agency in California, and the last name was made into more of a symbol, like Hawk, HAWKE, right? But the bird it's more than just the founder, And I'll circle back to what I said earlier around sort of this idea. Well, what is the buyer getting? And if they're getting something that is really important, and if that brand name is important, and if your name is part of it and it's super important, then great, but just be clear about how it all ties together.
Yeah. One of the things too, if we're talking about founders and family businesses and owners and such, one of the things that I've seen, it's tough, to build something your entire life. And then all of a sudden you've got somebody who comes in and they buys you, and they might want you to stay on for a couple of years, but you go from really an entrepreneur to almost an employee. And I have heard so many horror stories of people who just can't handle being in that new role or that new position, and things kind of fall apart. How many times do deals go bad like that because a founder is maybe just so unable to transition in that role?
It's pretty common. Yeah, I think it'll probably fall apart before the deal is closed. Once the deal is closed, then where it typically changes is when there's a commitment from a transitional standpoint. Usually, I think generally speaking, shorter is better. But I've talked to people where they said, yeah, the transitional period for the seller was 3 years, ended up being 6 months. And we were all happy with that, Yeah. And I think just having an open line of communication about what's important to you in the process, so that when you make these commitments at the transaction level, it might not be an employment agreement. It might be a consulting agreement, or it might be really open-ended and not so defined, so that there is flexibility between the parties.
Yeah, I know when I was approached, the people that wanted to buy my company, the real estate one, when they came in, they literally said, they gave me their numbers, and I said, listen, I'm going to make you miserable. I'm an entrepreneur, because they wanted me to stay on for, I think it was 2 years, through the transition period, and then be a part of a senior leadership team at that point. And so I told them no, and then they came back again, and they raised the number up a little bit, and I still was like, no, I'm just going to be too painful. Then they came back with a pretty darn good number. And they said, listen, Rodman, we want you to be an entrepreneur. We want you to come in here. We want your ideas. We want you to be a part of our growth. We want you to bring in your energy as an entrepreneur to help us grow this thing. And that helped me get through that, to go, okay, I'm going to take my baby that I spent all this time growing. I'm going to put it in their hands. And it's one of those things where I'm really glad that I did. But I've also seen other companies come in who didn't make it. The same thing, they got acquired, but for one reason or another, maybe their revenues scaled downward because they weren't putting the time in, and then they weren't hitting their earnouts and such. But I think it's a pretty big deal if you want to make sure that you're going to be there for a while, or maybe they don't even want you there. Maybe they just want to buy you and replace you and get you out. That's fine too. But man, I think it's a really important thing to make sure that you're a good fit with the company that's buying you if you're going to stay there for a bit.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important part of goal setting. If we can have alignment between our personal goals, financial goals, and business goals, and when it comes to readiness, aligning those three can help prevent the exit regrets that so many people experience.
Yeah. Laurie, do all these contracts that they do the majority of them have earnouts in them?
I don't know about majority. I think they're common. And the reason why they're common is because they're often used to bridge the price difference between buyer and seller.
Got Okay. So if somebody's at 3 million but the other group that's buying is at 2.6, they'll say, okay, we'll give you a 3, but you got to hit these earnout clauses. That's kind of how they
Yes.
bridge that.
That can be used that way. Yes.
Got you. Do most of them escalate, or are they based on current revenues? I know you've seen a lot more of these than I have, so maybe you know better.
I think they vary, and I think they're going to vary a lot. If we can get an earnout based on revenue, that's ideal. I would never recommend getting an earnout based on profit. You got to have a line of sight to what those metrics are. So if it's something in the business that you have a line of sight to, one of my clients had almost like bonus payments paid on the number of widgets sold. And so the widgets sold was new widgets sold, and they were comparing the database of so that if it was new or not, right, they could determine whether or not it was new. And if it was existing, then they would get a half payout. You could call that an earnout in a way, even though it was structured a little bit differently. But it did help bridge from here to there for the seller. The other thing I see is just, you got to have a good dialogue about alignment. So if you're not planning to stay in the business, then it probably wouldn't behoove you to agree to an earnout, because you're not part of it. You're not having an impact in the company. You don't have line of sight to achieving that number. You're letting others achieve it for you. So I think there's some risk around earnouts for sure, but they can be effective. I talked to two brothers who had a software company. They had an earnout. The earnout was met in 3 months, and they were happy.
Mm. Yeah, and I've seen it both ways. And we had some earnouts in our last deal, and we hit, I think, one of the 3. But that's the risk you take. There's going to be the potential economic downturn, which we had on the last 2 years. But like you said, you've got to be able to control the scenario. Like if you were trying to do it based on EBITDA or the bottom line, you're not in control of your expenses anymore. You're not the one who's going through the cash flow, making sure that things are tightened up, making sure that you're going to cash flow the way you used to cash flow. You can help be a part of that top line to make sure that the clients are still happy, to make sure that you're still pushing that product out or whatever it might be that you have in the place. But I could see where that'd be a real problem if you're basing your earnouts on the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not recommend it.
Yeah. So Laurie, you've given me such good information today, and I really want to talk a lot about your book, because these are just great concepts, and people are going to hear the podcast. They're going to be very excited and interested in these different strategies. But you've got the book too that details these strategies, correct?
It does. It does. Yeah. The book is called the Business Transition Handbook. And when I wrote it, I was writing it, putting myself in the seat of the entrepreneur, recognizing that they face various challenges on their journey, from growth to value building to exit. And I thought, how impactful would it be to write chapters that articulate pitfalls to avoid, right? We want to avoid the pain. So here's the things you want to avoid. And at the same time, we want the gain. What are the things that we want to do to double down and create value? So that became the subtitle of the book. So the Business Transition Handbook, it's an actionable name, right? Handbook, right? I want you to write in it. I want you to dog ear it. If it's a paper book, if it's digital, then whatever you got to do. But it's an action-oriented book. Every chapter ends with, well, what are you going to do? What are your takeaways? Here's takeaways. And what are you going to do in the next 3 to 6 months to move the needle on this particular topic? And so the sub premise of how do we avoid succession pitfalls and create valuable exit options? And the book has had really great reviews, an Amazon bestseller in its category, yada, yada. So that all feels great. But at the end of the day, it's about entrepreneurs getting value. And when they write reviews on Amazon, and it means so much to me, because they are saying how it resonates and it's helping and it's creating value for them. And so I was really motivated to take it to the next step. And that's why I created the course. The masterclass is actually 3 courses. And I take the book in so much more depth, and I've expanded all these worksheets, assessments, interactive tools that people can download. So there's 65 self-paced videos that are short form and easy to consume, right? So the course is pretty beefy, I'll give it that. But at the same time, I create time and space for people to think and reflect and work on this. So it's your Sherpa with you, your Business Transition Sherpa manifesting in a different way. It's this, people learn in different ways. And I think a lot of people want to learn from video and be given homework. And so that's what the course does. And then I also recognize, wait a minute, it's about the experience. And I know people are going to have questions and they probably want to bounce ideas. So I've created a bundled approach to it. If you hop into the masterclass, you're also going to get the community. And the community is not just the community of peers, which is awesome, but it is also a community of Sherpas. So you're going to get a community, a group advisory to meet with you as a group with the cohorts 2 times a month. And it's a great opportunity to work on this on your pace. I recognize not everybody's going to do this in one sitting, and that's okay. That I totally get that, and I embrace that. Take the time you need to, but give yourself the time. This is a great way to hold yourself accountable and work on the business and not just in the business.
Yeah. Well, I know I learned the hard knock way, and I would have loved in the beginning to have the book, well, and maybe a Sherpa. That would have been great too. So I think that is perfect. And I would advise people, don't think that you shouldn't think of the exit now. If you're starting, understand it now. And if you're in the middle, understand it then. And if you're getting toward the end, then understand it there too, because there's no better time than right now to figure out how you're going to do your exit strategy. So thank you for that. Where do people need to go if they want to learn more about what you do to find you? I think it's very important for people to get a really good grasp on their exit strategies before they even start their businesses. So I'd love for people to be able to connect with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. They can go to my website, thebusinesstransitionsherpa.com. And you can't do exit planning when you're exiting. It's too late. So I love that you're reinforcing the message that the best time to start was yesterday, but the next best is today. And the third best, of course, would be tomorrow. There's a lot of resources on the site for you, my podcast, my book, and then, of course, this masterclass.
I love that. And, entrepreneurs need support. I mean, they are in the trenches every single day. They work so hard at what they do. People think that if you go build a business, you're going to be working 8 hours a day. It's just not the case. Luckily, that's why you go to align with the things that you love doing in life. But to have that knowledge of what you have to give somebody like that, it's going to take years off their learning curve. And I always tell people are like, I'm not going to put my money in that education piece, or I'm not going to learn that right now. I'll wait. But it's just going to cost you money down the road. Get educated on it now. Get your learning curve down. Get really smart about what you're doing before you've even started. And you're going to be so much better off.
Yeah. Don't be a can kicker.
Don't be a can kicker. That's right. I like that. So I always ask one final question on the podcast. And that's if you could go back in time, sit down with your younger self and give yourself your one piece of most valuable advice that you've accumulated over your lifetime, what would that be for you?
I think to embrace the inner you of who you are and being honest about that when it comes to your vocation and whatever your vocation is, but kind of own it and lean in on it. For me, I think I've always been an entrepreneur in waiting. And when I was ready to think about entrepreneurship, it was a tech startup type of approach. It was get a tech co-founder, get venture funding. And that was the lens which I had. And I never felt like that was me. I didn't feel like I worked in startups like that, right? Where I was supporting other entrepreneurs. I was supporting the founder, but I wasn't the founder. I didn't have the risk profile. I had, family debt to service for a house and an MBA degree. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I can't go out and raise money on this. I just wasn't ready. I didn't even know that there was this other world out there of buying an existing business. I didn't know.
Feels good now though, doesn't it?
I didn't know about that. And I think in retrospect, I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always embraced the independence and the freedom that comes with it. But I've done it kind of within a company, which is probably how I became a CEO in my young 40s, because I was just like maverick, But but now with a little bit of money in my jeans and some flexibility to, focus on the things that I want to focus on, I'm now building that entrepreneurial platform, and I'm doing that. And I'm not buying the business, but I'm enabling others to have a life-changing succession, right? My mission to help entrepreneurs create their own life-changing succession stories. And for some of those people, it's to buy a business, and for others, it's to build it and sell it. And then the story goes on. And I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, well, the entrepreneur dream is to build that business, then have a nice exit and go sit somewhere and sip a cocktail. It's a lot harder said than done, but you're living the dream. So thank you, Laurie, for coming on the show today. This has been so valuable, and I know the listeners are going to get so much good value and information out of today's podcast. So
thanks, Rodman. I appreciate you. Thanks so much for having me on.